The day my wife's father died, everything shifted in a way that felt cold and calculated rather than sad. There was no shared silence, no tears, no ritual of respect. What filled the house instead was movement, voices, phone calls, and documents laid out on the dining table like trophies. I stood there watching people discuss assets, timelines, and authority as if a life had not just ended. In that moment, I understood grief was optional when money entered the room first. That realization settled quietly and changed how I listened to every word spoken after that followed inside me. By evening, the lawyer arrived, carrying a thin folder and an expression that suggested certainty. My wife stood taller than usual, already practicing ownership with her posture. She did not look at me while papers were signed and numbers were repeated with reverence. 33 million sounded abstract, yet final. The house suddenly belonged to her alone in her mind. I noticed how quickly marriage became irrelevant once inheritance was confirmed without discussion. That speed unsettled me because decisions were made as if I had vanished quietly from the room forever in that instant of triumph and confidence alone then. Her brothers watched from the doorway, saying nothing, offering no objection or sympathy. Their silence felt heavier than words because it confirmed permission. I was no longer family, but an inconvenience delaying celebration. My wife finally turned toward me not with anger, but dismissal. She spoke as though giving directions to staff, telling me to leave and solve my own problem elsewhere immediately. There was no argument, no negotiation, no hesitation, just a final decision delivered with chilling ease that erased years of shared effort in seconds without hesitation again or regret shown on her face at all that night. I packed a small bag without knowing what truly mattered to take. Practical things replaced memories because emotion felt unsafe. As I crossed the threshold, the walls seemed to shrink and the air felt tighter. That house once represented partnership, now it felt like evidence. I walked past rooms I helped shape where they no longer recognized me as belonging there. Each step carried disbelief and restraint because reacting would have meant surrendering dignity in front of people who already decided my value had expired alongside my access to their future celebrations and comfort zones completely without remorse or pause. Outside night settled quickly and the streetlights felt indifferent. I placed my bag in the car and sat still, letting the engine idle. Shock does not explode at this age, it tightens. I replayed conversations, contracts, and moments of trust, searching for what I had missed. Something about the speed of her certainty felt rehearsed, not earned. Experience teaches that real power moves quietly, while false confidence rushes to display itself before foundations are tested by time and scrutiny from those who understand consequences better than applause or approval from relatives waiting to benefit soon enough after signatures settle fully. I drove away without a destination, guided only by instinct and restraint. There was humiliation, yes, but also curiosity growing beneath it. At 40 plus, you stop asking why people betray you and start asking how. The night did not feel like an ending. It felt like the opening of a file no one else had bothered to read yet. I sensed that details ignored in celebration often return with weight and authority once arrogance relaxes, and mistakes surface under professional light later when consequences refuse to stay quiet anymore for those who assumed victory too early that evening alone. Everyone around her repeated the same version of events as if agreement made it true. The will was simple, they said. The house was hers. The money was hers. Certainty spread quickly because certainty is comfortable. I listened without interrupting, noticing how no one mentioned reading anything beyond the summary. At my age, confidence without verification raises questions. I had seen deals collapse because people trusted headlines instead of clauses. Celebration creates noise, and noise hides weak understanding. I stayed quiet because silence gives space to observe patterns, reactions, and assumptions forming before reality has the chance to correct them. What troubled me was not the inheritance itself, but the speed of her certainty. She behaved as if authority transferred instantly, without friction. I remembered the man who raised her, a careful builder of leverage, who measured loyalty through structure. He corrected waiters, checked receipts, and rewrote contracts by hand. Control mattered to him more than affection. A man like that does not distribute power casually. He designs it to test character under pressure. While others admired generosity, I recalled discipline. That memory slowed my thinking and planted doubt, where celebration demanded agreement quietly beneath the surface of shared assumptions. That night alone, I replayed past conversations, searching for overlooked signals. There were meetings he insisted I attend and questions he asked that seemed unnecessary at the time. He wanted to know who managed what and why. He listened more than he spoke and corrected people with precision. He once told me clarity protects families better than love. I dismissed it as arrogance then. Now it echoed differently. Wills are not emotional documents, they are instructions. People who love control use them to continue speaking after death, when celebration fades and consequences demand attention from those involved later in life. The next morning, I reviewed my own habits and recognized an old mistake. Marriage had made me defer details I once challenged professionally. Trust replaced curiosity and routine replaced review. I realized I never asked to see the full document because peace felt easier. That decision now stood exposed. Still, I felt no panic, only alertness. Complex estates rarely reward haste. They punish assumption. While everyone moved forward celebrating, I paused. Pausing allows patterns to reveal themselves, especially when others believe the story is already finished and mistakes become visible under legal light, with time and distance alone enough eventually. I did not confront her or question the inheritance openly. Experience teaches that premature challenges strengthen the wrong confidence. Instead, I watched behavior. She spent before securing and spoke before understanding. Advisors nodded but avoided specifics. That avoidance mattered. It told me complexity existed beneath the surface. People skilled in law rarely oversimplify. As hours passed, my humiliation shifted into curiosity. Something about the will resisted simplicity. And when documents resist simplicity, they usually protect intent rather than generosity, leaving room for accountability to surface later once ignorance collides with written reality and pride can no longer shield errors fully. By the end of that day, I understood why calm mattered. Rage would have blinded me to structure. Silence allowed insight. I was not searching for revenge, but for truth, because truth endures longer. The will everyone assumed simple had not been tested yet. Assumptions rarely survive scrutiny. I prepared myself to listen when professionals began asking questions she could not answer. That preparation was my advantage. In moments like this, patience becomes leverage, and leverage reshapes outcomes without confrontation, while time quietly exposes gaps others rushed past earlier. During celebration and confidence fueled by assumption alone then inevitably fails. 3 days after I left the house, my phone rang with a number I recognized but had never received before. It belonged to the family lawyer, a man who had handled generations of decisions quietly and efficiently. His call did not surprise me, but the timing did. 3 days was enough for confidence to meet reality. I answered calmly, expecting formality. Instead, his voice carried something unexpected. It was not concern or warning. It was controlled amusement, as if he were observing a predictable mistake unfold exactly as designed from the beginning. He did not introduce himself because he assumed authority does not need explanation. He asked if I was safe, then paused long enough to let silence speak. When he finally mentioned the will, his tone shifted into professional curiosity. He wanted to know whether I had read it carefully. I told him I had not been given the opportunity. That response pleased him. I could hear it. He explained nothing yet, but confirmed something important. There were questions being raised inside offices where certainty had already been publicly declared. He then laughed softly, not to mock me, but to acknowledge inevitability. He said my wife had arrived earlier that morning, confident and impatient. She wanted access, control, and immediate confirmation. Instead, she received reminders. He told her documents take precedence over emotion, and that reading comes before celebration. According to him, her reaction shifted within minutes. Confidence tightened into irritation, then silence. That silence triggered concern. Lawyers recognize silence as the moment when assumptions collapse and structure reasserts itself without needing to raise its voice. Listening to him, I felt the first clear shift since the night I left. Authority had entered the story, and authority does not speculate. It verifies. He explained that certain actions already taken had consequences that could not be reversed easily. He did not specify which actions, and I did not ask. Experience has taught me that information arrives faster when patience replaces pressure. He ended the call by saying he might need me present soon. That statement carried weight because presence implies relevance, and relevance had returned quietly after the call. I sat still longer than necessary, letting perspective settle. At this stage of life, you learn not to rush emotional conclusions. The lawyer had not promised help or taken sides. He had simply opened a door. I reviewed the last 3 days with clarity. Her certainty, my removal, the sudden urgency. All of it now fit a familiar pattern. People act boldly when they believe paperwork supports them. They hesitate when they discover paperwork asks more of them than expected under scrutiny. That evening, I realized the story had changed direction without noise or confrontation. The humiliation remained, but it no longer defined the moment. Knowledge had entered quietly through a phone call and shifted the balance. I understood then that whatever came next would not depend on emotion, but on interpretation. Documents do not respond to insults or confidence. They respond to accuracy. I did not celebrate this development. I prepared. Because when authority enters calmly, it signals that consequences are approaching and patience becomes the most effective response available. I slept that night with certainty replacing confusion. For the first time since being forced out, I knew the narrative was incomplete. Someone else was now reading the same pages I had ignored before. The simplicity everyone assumed had fractured. And once a story fractures, it never returns to its original shape. It moves forward reshaped by facts, timing, and the authority of those who understand structure better than pride. The meeting took place in a quiet conference room that felt heavier than any courtroom. Polished with muted voices and restrained emotion as documents were placed carefully on the table. No one rushed. No one smiled. The lawyer began by explaining that the will was never meant to reward excitement, but to enforce order. Assets were mentioned only briefly. Rules came first. Ownership was conditional, not celebratory. The atmosphere shifted as comprehension replaced assumption. People leaned forward not in confidence, but in calculation, realizing they had entered a structure designed to test behavior rather than generosity or loyalty alone. Now, he continued, slowly outlining conditions that had been ignored in the rush to celebrate. The house was not simply transferred, it was entrusted. Marriage was identified as stability, not romance. As long as the household remained intact, the property remained hers. The room reacted with subtle tension, chairs shifting, eyes avoiding contact. This was not a punishment clause, it was a control mechanism. Her father had believed power should never stand alone. He designed ownership to depend on partnership, discipline, and restraint, expecting behavior to reveal intent long after his voice disappeared from the family legacy itself, quietly enforced here. Then he addressed the money, and the air changed completely. 33 million was not a gift, but a process divided into stages monitored through compliance. Funds were released, gradually requiring documentation, cooperation, and patience. Authority remained external until conditions were satisfied. That structure ensured no single moment of recklessness could dismantle intent. Advisors exchanged looks, recognizing complexity. Confidence drained quietly. This was no simple inheritance, but a long examination of judgment. Every action taken since the funeral now mattered because timing, behavior, and decisions were already being measured against written expectations established by a deliberate legal framework alone. Patiently, the lawyer paused before reading the final section, knowing its weight would land without emphasis. The clause was written in the father's own language, precise and unmistakable. If the marital home was broken by expulsion, control shifted immediately. Protection dissolved. Authority paused. The rule was clear and irreversible. As comprehension spread, faces tightened. This was not theory but consequence. She had acted publicly, decisively, and without consultation. In doing so, she had triggered the very safeguard designed to restrain her worst instincts before they could define her future path under legal oversight permanently established by intention alone. There and then, no one spoke immediately because silence confirmed understanding. The room had drained not from emotion, but realization. Celebration had violated structure. Confidence had breached design. Her earlier decision to remove me was now fixed in record, not narrative. Lawyers do not correct facts, they acknowledge them. This was the moment strategy replaced arrogance. She stared forward, absorbing loss of control rather than loss of money. For the first time, authority belonged to the document, not the individual. The will had spoken exactly as intended without raising its voice, leaving no space for argument, denial, or revision later in time alone. I understood then why patience had mattered from the beginning. This was never about winning, but witnessing truth assert itself. She did not lose money in that room. She lost the illusion of control she assumed came with it. At 40 plus, you recognize these moments as rare and irreversible. I stood quietly, knowing nothing more was required of me. The document had spoken clearly. Responsibility had been assigned. and the consequences were now alive, moving forward without regard for pride, excuses, or regret. This marked the true end of her certainty and the beginning of accountability alone for everyone. After everything settled, people began asking the same question again and again. They wanted to know why I did not move back into the house once authority shifted. To them, control meant presence and ownership meant return. I listened politely because at this stage of life, explanations are optional. I understood their curiosity, but it came from a younger logic. They still believed victory looked like reclaiming territory. What they missed was that the house had already served its purpose. It revealed character, clarified intention, and closed a chapter that no longer required my presence or my attention anymore there. I did not return because returning would have suggested the conflict was personal. It was not. It was structural and final. Moving back would have tied my identity to a space defined by humiliation rather than growth. At 40 plus, you learn that environments carry memory. Walls remember how you were treated even when people pretend otherwise. I chose not to sleep again in a place where my value had been measured and dismissed. Freedom begins when you stop trying to correct disrespect and instead remove yourself from its reach permanently without looking back or seeking validation from anyone else. Some assumed I was afraid to take responsibility again. That assumption misunderstood the lesson completely. Responsibility without respect becomes obligation, not purpose. I had already lived that version of life. Returning would have restored appearance, but erased progress. I wanted mornings without tension, decisions without justification, and nights without rehearsing conversations. That kind of peace cannot exist where trust collapsed. By staying away, I protected something more valuable than property. I protected my sense of self, which had been tested and refined through restraint during moments that required patience, discipline, silence, clarity, and long-term vision above all else always. She remained in the house, but not as owner in the way she imagined. Oversight replaced freedom, and supervision replaced confidence. Every decision required approval, every movement left a record. That was the real inheritance. I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction, but understanding. Systems do not humiliate, they regulate. She learned that power comes with limits, and limits reveal maturity. I learned something different. Walking away at the right moment preserves energy that fighting would waste. That energy later becomes the foundation for a rebuilt life, built quietly, intentionally, without applause, validation, urgency, or unnecessary explanations from anyone. For those watching this story, the message is simple but not easy. Do not confuse winning with returning. Do not confuse assets with identity. At 40 plus, time becomes more valuable than proving a point. You stop chasing fairness and start choosing alignment. I aligned with peace, autonomy, and dignity. That choice required discipline because ego always wants the last word. I let go instead. Letting go is not weakness when it is deliberate. It is strategy refined by experience and paid for through restraint, earned slowly through loss, observation, silence, patience, and acceptance of irreversible truths over time alone. She kept the house under supervision, and I kept my distance by choice. Distance protected clarity, and clarity protected future decisions. I built something quieter afterward, a life without constant defense. I did not inherit money, but I inherited freedom. Freedom to choose where I live, how I think, and who has access to my time. That inheritance compounds without risk. It cannot be frozen, delayed, or controlled by clauses. It grows with wisdom. And for those who understand life beyond pride, that is the only wealth worth keeping long after houses fade, papers expire, and applause moves elsewhere eventually.